Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching The Salty Sea, and today we just got the profile changes for Destruction. This is everything you need to know to play Warcry 2.0 in, on your own without having to get the box or anything. It's an incredible level of generosity from Games Workshop that you really don't normally see. No more looking this gift horse in the mouth. Let's just get into it. So if you don't know, every single faction got their own reaction. So this one for Bonesplitterz, I'll go with them first, is called Get Stuck In. After an enemy fighter makes a move action visible to this fighter and within 3 inches of this fighter, pick another friendly fighter within 3 inches of this fighter. That fighter makes a bonus move. Must end within 1 inch of an enemy. The reacting fighter has to have actions left, right? But the moving fighter doesn't have to. They make a bonus move. So that's, I think, a really important piece to consider, right? You really, in a big team fight, you only have to have one fighter that is available to do this, essentially, and 3 inches is a long way. This also, more importantly, it lets you exchange actions. It lets an 80-point fighter, because that's the cheapest bone splitter, basically give their action to another fighter, right? So you can get a really important fighter like your big boss or even a monster, although as we've seen in the PDFs, the smallest destruction monster is still on a 160 point base. The Arachnarok spider has a really attractive wounds profile, but I'm not even going to put it in this video because 160 millimeter round base, you just can't play that in Warcry. However, there's still a lot of big bosses. The ally mechanic is going to let you bring in things from other factions, and you can basically take your cheapest fighter, give one of their activations essentially to one of your most important fighters. So this is going to have significant list building implications. It's going to have a real effect on your play style. I'm calling any Bonesplitterz list babysitters now, because that's essentially what you're doing, is having your big fighters babysit chaff. You're going to want this kind of triangle effect with 2 chaff near 1 big fighter to kind of give it these bonus move actions to get your biggest fighters, your biggest, most important fighters into the fight as quickly as possible. I think it's going to be pretty powerful. Now, it's going to need to be powerful because WA was nerfed. It now only adds half the value of the dice instead of the full value of the dice. Now, charge still exists. That's a bonus move action that all the orcs get, but you are going to really feel this. Now, it's still going to be really good. WA, even only adding half the value of the dice, is still one of the better abilities in the game, but it is just a pretty significant nerf to remember. Some other changes: Ritual Dance was buffed. It now heals D3 instead of just 1. Tooth Shiv was changed. It deals 3 on a 3-up instead of either 1 or the value. Overall, the EV, I think, is a little bit better, but just, I don't know. In general, it's just more reliable. Overall, the abilities on Bonesplitterz, you could say that they were nerfed, right? Even though these are 2 good stat changes, WA hurts them quite a bit. But that allows for significant stat improvements, right? So you'll see, and this is true, the Order one dropped yesterday. Bonesplitterz just generally got much cheaper, and in general the leaders just got weaker by losing wounds, but then stronger by dropping points a ton. Though some things to note with Bonesplitterz, the first thing is they fixed the internal balance bone totem problem. Bone totems were generally the same price as regular fighters from that group, and were just way better because they had 3-inch range. Now they're more expensive, and it's actually kind of a legitimate question which one you would take, which is a really nice change to Bonesplitterz in general. Also, you have kind of really big buffs to what I call the building block fighters. So the backbone of your list, your Morboys, your savage orcs, all of those have gotten quite a bit cheaper. and it's just going to be a lot easier to build lists with Bonesplitterz. You're going to be able to put, I know it's only 10 points difference, but it's usually going to be the difference between 1 or 2 more splitters on the table. So they're not going to play quite so elite anymore, especially with how much cheaper their leaders all got. And it's going to be really tempting, I think, to put multiple leaders on the table to actually take advantage of the 3 leader unit, or sort of 3 leader change instead of just only having 2. You might actually run 3. You also see, I think, a lot of wizards got a little bit more interesting. A lot of the Bonesplitterz wizards were really bad before. Now, you know, you're probably still not going to take a War Doc, but it's a lot more attractive than it was, right? And so for casual play, I think you can try it out. Let's also talk about Ironjawz. So they have the exact same reaction of get stuck in. Everything is still the same. Significant list building and playstyle effect. I think Ardboys become a lot more important, and now the ally mechanic mitigates this somewhat, but Ironjawz have a lot more exciting things to give these bonus moves to in terms of how much damage they do once they get there. Just like Bonesplitterz, Wa was nerfed. It now adds half the value of the dice instead of the full value. It's still really good, but it's a lot worse. Shield Bash is gone. And then Duff Up to Big Thing was nerfed and then given to Shield Ardboys, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But Shield Bash was terrible, so you're not complaining about this. It's just totally nonsensical. Foot of Gork was nerfed, and I don't know why, because the Shaman wasn't very good, but now it does 1 damage on a 3-up, as opposed to before it would do it on a 2-up. However, there's a huge buff here, and it's called You Messin'. Models with 14 wounds or fewer don't count on objectives within 3 inches of this fighter. That's it, they don't count. I think this completely revolutionizes Ironjawz. If you saw yesterday, a lot of cheap... Now, yesterday is when the order points drops. I haven't put out that video yet, but I will very soon. A lot of fighters, especially sort of cheap move 3 ones, became very spammable. Order got a lot more spammable fighters in Cities of Sigmar, in Quadrant Overlords, and Fire Slayers. There's sort of an invasion of the cheap dwarves getting on objectives. And then, of course, you know, in other Grand Alliance, Warcry generally has a problem of spammable fighters, right? Well, Ironjawz doesn't care. Ironjawz doesn't care at all. Ironjawz just says, you know, all this tiny little mini people around the board, I don't care. I'm not even going to bother attacking them. I'm only going to attack their leaders, and once I've killed their leaders, I win. And that's going to be true whether you're in a hunter mission, because, you know, you generally have to kill the leaders in a hunter mission anyway. In then any objective mission, once you kill the leaders, they can't get on objectives at all. You are really tough. So their cheap fighters are going to have a hard time getting your health down, and you're just going to win. There's nothing else to say. Any swarm warband is just going to lose to you. So that's really incredible. You Messin' is amazing. I think it makes having at least 1 brute in your Ironjawz list, at least competitively, just incredibly viable. Now, Ironjawz still aren't going to be sort of impossible to beat because, again, the Wa nerf hits them really hard. And there's also just a lot of other really good factions. But this immediately puts them into the competitive scene. Now, how much so? We don't know, right? Like, are they the faction to beat? I don't think so. I think there's stronger factions out there. But they are 100% competitive now and can win on any type of scenario. Because before, Ironjawz just could not win on objective scenarios against really quality swarm warbands. Now, they're actually in the driver's seat in those matchups. We also see a lot of other changes, though, that I think are very much worth talking about. So first of all, cavalry is big and scary now. This is often true for a lot of factions. Regular Gorgruntas, I think, are a really hot pick. Yes, they went up in points, but they do a lot more damage, and they move 8 now instead of 6, which is way better. I think having a Gorgrunta in your list is going to be really attractive for Ironjawz players, and you're going to have more room for it too, because all your other things have gone down so much. You have massive, massive point drops for every Footslogger, and whereas most factions in the game, their leaders went way down in wounds, that's less true for Ironjawz. Now, the Mega Boss did. It went down by 3 wounds, but it went down 55 points to make up for it. Mega Bosses are going to be wandering around the table, just blowing stuff off the board, left and right. You're going to love it. Ironjawz are going to be an absolute terror in combat, with all these leaders getting so much cheaper, so much easier to field. Now, the question is, right, whether cheap Ardboys, using Charge, using Get Stuck In, whether or not all of that is going to be enough to deliver these bosses into combat, right? These brute bosses, I'm really, really interested in the brute bosses, specifically because they can both lead your warband and use Umessin, right? The dream is essentially you Wa in round 1, and then in round 2 and 3 and 4, you're probably using Umessin out of your brute boss in all of those rounds, right? So are the cheaper Ardboys, is this reaction, are all of those going to be enough to deliver your bosses into combat? That remains to be seen, whether that makes up for the Wa nerf. But, you know, there's a potential that you don't even care, right? Ardboys just got so much cheaper. Going down 25 points is amazing. I think they're going to be really useful now. You know, every troop type has a really vital role now, right? Because brutes can proc Umessin, right? You might decide that you don't want to use 3 brute bosses. That's all of a sudden you're up to almost 600 points if you do that. So you might do just 1 brute boss and another brute somewhere else to hopefully do this on 2 objectives, right? Or have the option to do it on 2 objectives. So brutes are going to be important. Ardboys are so cheap and just so good at fighting that they're going to be important. And then these Gorgruntas, they're fast, they're going to deal a ton of damage when they get to where they're going, and they're basically unkillable. So even at -2 move, them holding a treasure is going to be 6 move, and then just having a ton of wounds. They're going to be really good too. So you're kind of spoiled for choice now with Ironjawz. Again, I don't think they're, you know, a top 3 faction in the game, but I do think they are competitive now, and that each troop type has a vital role to play. And so it's going to be really difficult to find the correct balance with Ironjawz. But if you do, I think you're going to be really rewarded. I think early tournaments, I don't think we're going to see Ironjawz dominate and win early tournaments. But as people figure out the right way to configure their Ironjawz lists, I think it's going to take a while, but I think it's going to happen, and they're going to be really powerful. Part of why I'm so excited about Ironjawz, they are one of my factions. I've heretofore only ran them kind of as a joke because they're, you know, not very good, but they are very fun. But I think they are competitive now. So I think the first thing I'm going to try, I'm going to, you know, lean into Get Stuck In, I think. I'm going to start with a brute boss with Claw, have 1 Gorgrunta, just rank and file Gorgrunta with the Pig Iron Choppa. That's the range 1. Maybe I'll regret that and want to go to range 2, who knows. And then I'll have 1 more brute, a brute dual wielder, and then 5 Ardboys. 8 fighters is a lot more than Ironjawz has been fielding before. I think a lot of factions, a lot of formerly elite factions, are going to have a lot more fighters now. We saw that with Stormcast yesterday when the points came out. So I think that's going to help them a lot. We might see, you know, wanting to shuffle this up to get more of that brute killing power, but in general, I think this is what I'm going to start with. I just really want to learn if Umessin is the game changer I think it is. Could be wrong, you know. Generally, objective missions are only about 1/3 of the missions in Warcry, but they're the 1/3 that Ironjawz is worst at. So I think it could be really interesting and really valuable. I also just really want to see if Gorgruntas are insane now. They got a huge damage buff. Yes, they went up quite a bit in points, but you know, with the sort of The help that Mounts got, being able to go upstairs, I think that's valuable for them. I think just in general, I think we could see just a lot more play for Ironjawz in this edition. So let's get into Kruleboyz. Kruleboyz have the reaction Cunning Trap. Procs the same way that the Get Stuck In does, right, when there's a move within 3 inches. But you pick another friendly fighter within 3 inches of this fighter. That fighter makes a bonus attack action, not move. The attack must target the enemy fighter that just moved. So this is essentially the flip side of Get Stuck In. I think it's harder to use, but potentially more powerful. So basically, you can use the tiny little pot grot to get free attacks on your killaboss. And that's what's so powerful, is that Kruleboyz have cheaper units to use this activation, to proc this reaction with, basically. It works with ranged units, although Bolt Boys have a minimum 6-inch window now, so they actually can't use this. So only your Swamp Kala Shaman can benefit. Now, the Swamp Kala Shaman did go down in points, so that's kind of nice. You'll probably run one, but you know, it makes the ranged use of this a little bit more narrow. However, you know, what it does do is it incentivizes overlapping bubbles of fighters, and it incentivizes getting in some 2-inch reach. Now, Kruleboyz, as of right now, have pretty weak 2-inch reach fighters. We don't see any Underworlds fighters in this edition. However, for the tinfoil hat among you, there's some hints dropped here and there that they plan on putting them back in later. And Kruleboyz have, you know, you could even count this as one of the quote-unquote hints, because this reaction is so good with 2-inch reach, but the good 2-inch reach fighters in Kruleboyz are in Underworlds. So once that Underworlds warband comes into Warcry, and I'm pretty confident it will, you know, maybe not soon, but eventually, certainly within the next, 8 months or so. Once that comes in, I think Kruleboyz are going to get a huge shot in the arm, and they're going to get pretty good once they're using the 2-inch reach from that Underworlds warband. But even now, you know, when you can proc this, it's going to be very powerful. You're going to exchange a reaction from a little pot grot and get, you know, a massive killaboss doing real damage, and you're just going to get a ton out of that. You also get 2 allies now, and there's some really good 2-inch reach allies in Destruction that you can use. So for example, Tyrants are just incredible with this. Boingrot Bounder bosses are going to be a good option for this. Loon Boss on Squig is going to be a good option for this. So Kruleboyz can really supercharge an ally using this reaction, and I think that's good to have. We've only got 2 ability changes that I spotted. One is Venom Encrusted Weapons got buffed. It's +1 damage to hits and crits now. It used to only be crits, and it wasn't very useful, so now it's a little bit better. The other one is Aimed Shot was buffed. Now you crit on a 4+ instead of a 5+. So even though Kruleboyz are generally sad about their change to Bolt Boys, you know, just shooting in general was nerfed, but Aim Shot is significant. So when you look at the Kruleboyz profiles, you can see they shuffled the decks in a much kind of wider way than they did for most factions. The first thing they did, though, Potgrots were nerfed twice. Their profile is a little bit worse now, and they cost 10 more points than they used to. They clearly heard the screams about 35-point models. Other than that, they kind of shuffled the decks in general. I still think you might play a few Potgrots if you have them, just because 45 points gives you a lot of flexibility. But they buffed Gut Rippas, so you know the one with the sword went down 10 points. The one with the spear went down 5 points and got a little bit more damage, just +1 crit. I still don't think Gut Rippas are very good, but at 15 wounds for 75 points, that's a lot of beef that's tough to clear, and they've got the shield, so they've got pretty good toughness. They're going to be hard to clear off the board, so I think that's kind of something that you can lean into if you want to with Kruleboyz. But I also noticed, you know, the Swamp Kala Shaman just got a massive negative 40-point buff, and then that thing's ability is all about sort of reducing the damage, the incoming damage in a pretty wide circle. So it kind of pushes you towards this control list using these sort of improved Gut Rippas plus a Swamp Kala Shaman to kind of just really hamstring your opponent's ability to ever kill a model. And that's especially true because it's just so much harder to use Bolt Boys and Hobgrots now. Bolt Boys, they have the minimum range of 6 inches now instead of 3, so you can't disengage and shoot something that's caught up to you. And then Hobgrots have this problem of their ranged attack is only 5 inches now instead of 7. However, one thing that's kind of weird to me, the Hobgrot boss took a massive, massive points change and a pretty big nerf to the profile. However, it's exactly the same profile as a Hobgrot Slitta for, if I read it right on the PDF, the exact same points cost, but it just, it has one more melee attack. That's the only difference. So I'm sure in a future change, one of these two, either the regular Hobgrot is going to go down in points, the Hobgrot boss might go up. Either way, I think Hobgrot bosses are pretty good, but they're still not amazing. They're just solid. And then Gut Rippas, I think, are going to be sort of the playstyle that they're pushing you into. Not that I necessarily think it's really powerful. The other thing that you can do, though, the other thing that's notable is that Killabosses have kind of completely changed how they work. One, we have a whole new Killaboss, Killaboss with Flail. And then the regular Killaboss, the damage went down a tiny bit, but then otherwise it went down 15 points. It's basically looking like we've seen the bespoke leaders for the Nurgle, the Chaos, and the Hashut warbands, or sorry, the Be'lakor and the Hashut warbands, and it's basically on par with that Be'lakor leader. Like it's maybe not quite as good, but it's like kind of in the same category as these sort of bespoke warband leaders. And so if that's something you like playing with, if that's a playstyle you like, you've basically got that with your foot Killaboss. The Killaboss on Gnashtooth, I think, much more correctly represents what that model looks like it would do on the table now. It's gotten way stronger, but to make up for it, they increased it by 85 points. So huge points increase, but it's going to play more like it looks now. Whether you're actually willing to spend a third of your list on it is going to be a whole nother sort of question altogether. But it's there if you want it. Let's go into Ogor Mawtribes. I'm going to start with their reaction. It's awful. After they're targeted by a melee attack, but before the hit rolls are made, if there's no crits rolled, deal 3 and heal 3. Now, this is actually more impactful than the average reaction. The reason it's bad is that, 1, only ogres can use it within Mawtribes, and 2, ogres have a massive value per action in terms of what they achieve on the board. And this reaction just does not create a ton of value. So on an actual ogre, you're just never going to want to use it. You're never going to want to sacrifice 200 points worth of action to just deal 3, heal 3, So I don't know. Maybe there's situations when you'll use it, but not very often. So let's go on to their abilities, right? So on the Maw Path was buffed a little bit. It used to be half the value of the dice. Now it's 3, so that's a little bit of an EV boost, right? Because anytime it would have been 1 through 4 on the value of the dice, that is basically buffed. Blood Gruel was reworked. It was a completely 100% useless strength buff of 1 before, and now it's a weak heal. This is probably a buff, but it's marginal because it's still not a very good heal. Sneaky Traps is on a double now instead of a triple. That's pretty nice to have. And then Iron Fist was buffed. It used to deal damage on a 4+, now it deals damage on a 3+. So it's a little bit better. The Mawtribes profiles, there's kind of a lot to go over here. So first, regular melee ogres got significantly better. And then to balance that, non-ogres got way worse. Not always way worse, but worse in general. So first let's just talk, the elephant in the room is the Thunder Fist. The Someone at GW must have gotten wind of first edition double Thunder Fist lists, because Leadbelchers and Thunder Fists are completely different now. They're not useless, but they're just very different. They do a lot less damage, but they also cost fewer points. So you might actually still include one in your list. I don't think the shooting into combat buff is as nerf is as, devastating as I think some folks are making it out to be. You can still shoot, so you might still include a Leadbelcher, but I don't think it's the best thing going here. I think in general, Gluttons went down 10 points, kept a pretty similar profile. Iron Guts went down in points and got way more powerful. So I think Iron Guts are a really interesting place to be. And then, Mournfangs, yes, they're more expensive now by a lot, but just their impact on the board has gone way up. You're going to hear me talk about this with Cavalry in general. They're clearly just not happy with where Cavalry was in first edition. These are just way more impactful than they used to be. So you'll enjoy playing with them. I don't know if that makes them competitive, but who knows. So in general, these melee ogres are good. I think things like, say, Icefall Yetis, up 20 points. They're still playable, right? They still have that bonus move, but 20 points is a lot. Gorgers are up 15 points for the exact same profile. Again, Gorgers were something you were really excited to play before. Now, I think a little bit less so. Frost Sabers, got a little bit weaker and went up 5 points. You can still give them their bonus attack, but, they're a lot less attractive compared to a melee ogre. I think GW was looking at ogre lists that were essentially Gnoblar lists, essentially, Yeti lists, and thinking that that's not what they were interested in. It's not supposed to be just a Thunder Fist and Gnoblars and Yetis, which is what I think some people were running. So I get it from their point of view. They also nerfed Gnoblars. They just made them have fewer wounds, less damage, still cost 45 points. You'll still run Gnoblars, but they're just a lot less valuable now. So previous lists just completely smashed, not really workable at all anymore. However, I still think there's real power in ogres. People in casual play would still complain about losing to just like a pile of gluttons, because gluttons were just so tough to shift and they would deal so much damage in melee, and just like if you just like to do the I push my people forward and attack you plan, and then your ogre opponent was also pushing their people forward and attacking you, you would lose. So gluttons, I think there's still some power there. I think there's still some power in Iron Guts, but ogre lovers, I think, are going to have to kind of find a new avenue. One of those potential new kind of ways to do it might be the Tyrant. Tyrants kept a fairly similar power level profile, but went down 20 points. So they might be a little bit better than they were before. A lot of ogre heroes kind of had little trade-offs. Usually they went down in wounds a little bit, but then picked up some other things here and there. So I think you'll see a lot that you are willing to play with the melee ogres. But just in general, in this edition, sort of basic foot sloggers got buffed, and sort of other fancy things from first edition generally got nerfed a little bit. And ogres, it really seems like someone took exactly the competitive list people were running and tried to just nerf exactly that while leaving the rest of it intact. Gloomspite Gitz. So their reaction, it's called Pile On. When you sort of get, it's basically the same as Get Stuck In. You pick another friendly fighter. That fighter makes a bonus move. Must end within 1 inch of an enemy. It's strictly. Why did I say it was strictly better than Get Stuck In? Now let's. I'm gonna go back and read. We'll see if I end up cutting this or not. Aha. Okay, so I'll keep that in. A little peek behind the curtain there. Listen, the reason it's strictly better than Get Stuck In is because it just says visible friendly fighter. It doesn't have to be within 3 inches of you. So this is just way better because you can just slingshot a cavalry unit 8 to 10 inches directly into combat. I guess I should have just read my own notes there instead of going back and checking. But yeah, so you can, if someone goes within 3 inches of you, you can get a squig hopper in there, you can get a spider rider in there. As long as you have a few cavalry in your list, it is never safe to engage Gloomspite Gitz. You are going to be able to exchange your cheap fighters, your 55-point Stabbas and Nettas, for like very high impact actions, like attack actions for your opponent, because or for your big things, because now you won't have to waste activations getting into combat. It's going to mean that even though the damage profiles haven't really gotten much better, Gloomspite Gitz is going to output a lot more damage overall, because you're just going to be attacking more with your high damage pieces and attacking less with your low damage pieces, despite having the same number of things. So this is pretty significant list building implications, but of course a lot less restrictive on playstyle than it was before. Now, their abilities, Sneaky Stab was nerfed, but it was way too good before. It was completely broken. It's still one of the best abilities in the game. It just adds the dice value only to crits, but it's still just Rampage Plus, which is good. Spider Bite was buffed. You're going to see Spider Riders in general are a lot better than they used to be. It goes 3 damage on a 4+. It used to be 2 through 5 was 1, 6 was a 3. So now it misses on a 2 or a 3, but it's still higher EV. The EV now is 5.4 versus it was 4.1. So it's kind of complicated, but overall it's a buff. Boing 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 was removed. That's okay, it was boring. I mean, it was good, but it was boring. It was just a regular charge. However, welcome to Madcap Destruction. Alright, so you get a bonus move action. Then you do charge damage if you ended in combat. That's incredible. Bonus move actions are amazing, just in general. And so you can do this on Squig Riders and on Fanatics. It's bonkers. It's crazy. It's amazing. If you roll a 1 or a 2, it can go poorly because it's not a bonus move action equal to your move. It's a bonus move action equal to double the dice. So you roll a dice, you get a bonus move, double the value of the roll. So you don't even get to kind of manipulate it with wild dice, which is too bad. But if you're anywhere near combat at all, you just roll a dice. You can get this bonus move. It's worth it even if you only get to move 2 inches or 4 inches. You just might go in a different direction, do something else. But if you roll enough to just ability dice your way into combat, then you get charge damage, then you get to attack twice. It means these cavalry, these Squig Riders are just going to be doing a ton of damage out there. You also have a Gabapalooza reaction. So Spiteful Demise, after hit rolls but before damage, you deal 3 on a 4-up if it would kill your guy. This is really solid value because it lets you wait. But yeah, it's kind of, you'll use it in similar situations to when you would have used counter, but every once in a while you'll get to conserve your action, basically. They changed the abilities though. Loonshine Potion adds 3 attacks instead of half the dice value. This was already really good. It was already a really nice sort of ally combo thing to be doing, and so the fact that it adds 3 instead of half the dice value is really nice. Boogeyman Dice or Dance adds 3 also instead of half the dice value. It's still kind of low value for a triple, but it's good. Fungoid Cloud was nerfed. It subtracts half the value instead of the full value of the dice from the attacks of the targeting fighter. Now, it's still good. It's still really hard to set up, but on a 5 or 6, honestly, it's going to, half the dice, you know, subtracting 3 attacks most of the time, since it's a minimum of 1, it's going to have the same effect as subtracting the full dice value. So in practice, you might not even feel this nerf, but it is technically a nerf. Overall, I would say between these two, the abilities for Gloomspite Gitz just got way better, which is good because I think in general their fighter profiles got nerfed. We see across the board, goblins, they just decided we're sitting on too many wounds. We're too powerful. So like a lot of the Gobapalooza all went down one strength. A lot of regular goblins got fewer wounds and one less strength, kind of across the board. However, we did see some bright spots. Huge buff for everything spider themed, right? It makes me wonder if we're getting a spider expansion soon because we saw a little spider on the map. The Scuttle Boss is really powerful now, which is kind of cool. It's on par with the Squig Heroes is basically what it is. So the Squig Heroes are still really good. They were generally nerfed a tiny bit, but they're still very good, right? Like the Squig Hopper Boss got a little weaker, mostly just like fewer wounds, but it also got 5 points more expensive. It was one of the most powerful things to be doing. It was, kind of leading the charge in 1.0 as one of the kind of things that the entire edition revolved around. So the fact that it's weaker now is fine. It's still very competitively viable. And with the bonus to, what do we call it? Madcap Destruction. With Madcap Destruction, a Squig Hopper Boss is actually going to be potentially more impactful than it was before. Now, Madcap Destruction, if you're leaning on that for your power, it really just means your first cavalry is insane, and your cavalry after that, like, I don't know if you would run a Squig Hopper Boss plus 3 Squig Hoppers anymore. I don't know that would really be doable. But your first one's going to be really good. And Squig Hoppers, they went down 5. They just went down a couple wounds. They're just as good as they were before, so maybe even you kind of go with a Scuttle Boss since it's not using the that ability, and then you have Squig Hoppers. Who knows, right? But there's a lot to play with here. Basically, because of all the changes, this faction's going to play really differently than it did before, but there's still power here. For example, like Snufflers and Squigs, I think are a good example of units that just aren't the same unit. Right, Squigs got 60 points cheaper, but they got a lot weaker, do a lot less damage. Sneaky Snufflers got 20 points cheaper, but they aren't quite as tanky as they were. They're significantly less tanky than they were before. They do a little less damage, but they are 65 points, so they're kind of a different category of fighter than they were before. So that's going to just require like a total change to how you think about how Gloomspite Gitz works. In general, I think Destruction got very big changes in terms of not just all in one direction, like you can't just use 1.0 lists very often in Destruction, as opposed to, yesterday we saw like a lot of Stormcast. You might do the same thing, but just have one more Stormcast in your list, because everything just kind of went down by the same amount. Here in Destruction, you're seeing just very sort of shuffling the board changes. A lot of these kind of goblins, they decided need to be different. Netters went up 10 points and got weaker. You're still going to play probably 1 or 2 netters just because the nets are still good. So, smart by GW. If they put something up 10 points and you're still going to play 2 of them, they probably did a good job with that change, right? So that's probably a smart change. But in general, as I said before, this is just going to feel like a totally new faction. I think you're still going to want to be flooding the board with a lot of goblins. Your dagger and spear stabbas also went down to 55 points, so you have a lot of flexibility with what goblins you're going to use. Maybe you prefer to use Sneaky Snufflers because they have a few more wounds than the stabbas do. But then you're going to be kind of really wanting to use those to teleport your cavalry into combat around the board, using your reactions, using your Madcap Destruction, getting as much out of your cavalry as you possibly can. So I think it's going to be a totally different faction than it used to be, basically. It still might actually, lists might look similar, but just play completely different, in terms of looking similar, like still running 3 cavalry and then a bunch of chaff, but just play totally different. We also, I think it's worthwhile to say, we have Fanatics now. I don't really want to play them because they're so few wounds. They do great damage. 115 and 110 probably are somewhat reasonable places to point them, but man, only 6 wounds for 115 points. Like, I couldn't do it. I think this is going to be sort of a tricksy, like, now you see them, or really now you don't see them. Now you do, like an ambush damage faction, and I think that, you know, I'm not sure that I want fanatics in there, given how easily they could be blown up before they get to do their ambush. So that's everything in destruction. It's a lot to take in. A lot of the destruction warbands are completely different than they were before. I'm really excited for Ironjawz. I think Gloomspite Gitz are going to be a real puzzle. I think they're going to be just as powerful. Maybe not just as, because they were like one of the factions driving first edition, but they're going to be almost as powerful as they were before. They're still going to be tournament quality, but they're going to be just very different. I think you're going to really need to leverage that reaction, which I think so far is the best reaction in the game. At least having seen the core box and having seen the order reactions and now seeing destruction, I think that one's probably the best reaction in the game right now, the Gloomspite one. So you're going to be able to get a lot out of it. But how you do so, how you play it, is going to be really complicated, and it's going to require some real changes from Gloomspite players. So Ironjawz and Gloomspite, I think, are poised to be in a good place here. And overall, I think it's really exciting. I think, yeah, I'm going to be doing more of these videos as we get more of these stat changes. And until the next one, may all your rolls be crits.